Hey class, we're going to focus on the muscles of the shoulder and arm, the forearm, and the hand. So basically the upper appendage in this video. So let's dive into it. First we have the trapezius on our list. And as we're looking at the trapezius, let me go ahead and reset this view for us here. So here is our virtual cadaver. And I'm going to look at the posterior here, and we can see the trapezius. And as we look at the trapezius, there's a left-right trapezius that I can highlight here. Here's the left, here's the right. It's a large sheet of muscle that covers the superior margin or superior region of the back and also the posterior of the neck. So we have the trapezius for our first muscle. And I'll go ahead and hide the trapezius so we can focus on our next muscle groups. Next we have the deltoid. As we look at the deltoid, this is a muscle that is broken up into three groups. For lab, you don't need to differentiate between the three groups. Just know that the deltoid is commonly referred to as the shoulder muscle. So there is our deltoid. Our next muscle is the pectoralis major. As a good rule of thumb, class, when you see a name like major, that implies that there's a smaller muscle called the minor. Even if we don't necessarily put that on your lab objective list, just be aware of that. So I'll go ahead and get rid of the multi-select here. Here is the pectoralis major. We have a right and a left pectoralis major, a large muscle of the chest. It makes up what many people refer to as the breast muscle or the pecs, if you spend a lot of time in the weight room. And for those of you curious, that's the minor right there. So next we have the Latissimus Dorsi. The name here is really a great name. Dorsi refers to a directional term that's kind of falling out of favor, dorsal or posterior, and latissimus refers to lateral. So this is a muscle that's both dorsal and lateral, or posterior and lateral. So as we look at the posterior of the back, there's this large sheet-like muscle that is both posterior and bends around laterally to the lateral margins of the body. This is the latissimus dorsi. Here's the right lat. Here is the left latissimus dorsi. And then we have supraspinatus and infraspinatus. This refers to the spine of the scapula. One of these is going to be superior, the other will be inferior to the spine of our scapula. So as we look at the scapula, right here, this muscle that I've just highlighted is the scapula. And I'll get rid of the lats. So let's cover our latissimus dorsi right here just to clean it up a bit. And I'll get rid of the deltoid as well, all three heads of the deltoid on the right shoulder, to really better highlight the scapula. So here we're looking at a scapula. And our scapular spine, I'll go ahead and annotate with some green here, just to emphasize again here, that green line represents the scapular spine. And directly superior to the scapular spine is the supraspinatus. Directly inferior to the scapular spine is the infraspinatus. So, hopefully those names will make sense for you. Well, here, let's go ahead and finish up the scapula. We have the Teres Major. And I'll clean this up. Teres Major is this most inferior muscle of the scapula. I'll get rid of the infraspinatus and the supraspinatus, and I'm also going to get rid of some of these other muscles as well. I just want to really clean it up here to better emphasize why we call these muscles what we call them. Come on, here we go. I can't click on anything close to this menu for my recording software. So we've cleaned it up quite a bit. We have a Teres minor, Teres major. And I've traditionally struggled with these. To me, they look like they're about the same size. The Teres major is technically a little bit larger, hence the name major. I also want to emphasize, though, if you're looking for something a little bit easier, focus on the most inferior corner of the scapula. I'm a physics guy. My first graduate degree is in physics, and as I look at the Teres major is going to produce the major source of leverage compared to the Teres minor. So I'm thinking of mechanical leverage, mechanical force. If I were to draw, let me clean this up here. I'll use red for my lever arms. So we have a fulcrum right there. at the head of the humerus. The Teres Major has a longer lever arm. I'll show the lever arm of the Teres Major in green compared to the Teres Minor. The Teres Minor I'll show in blue. Teres Minor has a shorter lever arm, and so the Teres Minor produces a minor amount of force, whereas the Teres Major has that much longer lever arm, and it has a more distal attachment point on the humerus, and consequently it's going to produce it'll be a major source of leverage compared to the Teres Minor. So yes, the Teres Major is a little bit bigger, but it also is the major source of leverage compared to this other muscle. Let's go ahead and add our muscles back. All the muscles. There we go. So in a full body, full muscle, that's going to be our Teres Major. Teres Major. So we have infraspinatus, Teres Major. Next we have the bis and tris. So biceps brachii and triceps brachii. Most of you are going to know these muscles off the top of your head. As we look at this posterior view, I'm going to go ahead and highlight the triceps brachii. And the triceps brachii has 3 primary heads, hence the names Triceps Brachii. I've just highlighted all 3 of those parts of the triceps for us right there, so you can get a good view of the triceps brachii. And then over here we have the biceps brachii. The biceps brachii has 2 primary heads. We have a medial and lateral head. The medial head is called the short head. The lateral head is called the long head. I'll go ahead and highlight both of those for us right here. Let's do a multi-select. So now we can see the 2 heads of the biceps brachii highlighted. We also have the brachialis and brachioradialis. As we look at the brachialis, the brachialis is going to be sandwiched in the middle between the biceps brachii and the triceps brachii. So right here in the middle, we have the brachialis. The brachialis, if we focus on just this muscle, I want to look at the termination, the insertion of it. Notice how it terminates on the anterior here. So this brachialis, even though it's kind of oriented, it looks like it's oriented laterally, here's the humerus. And I'll clean this up so we can really emphasize the actions of the brachialis. So here's a humerus. You can get a better view of the humerus right here. And then the brachialis is primarily on the anterior of the humerus. So it's really a muscle of flexion of the elbow. It helps to flex that elbow because it terminates down here on the distal end of the elbow on the ulna. Not that we're asking you to memorize origins and insertions for this class, but the brachialis is one that I see students mix up the actions on. It's a flexor of the forearm, not an extender of the forearm. And then we have the brachioradialis. So as we're looking at our brachioradialis, I need to add our muscles back. The brachioradialis is, as really the name says it all, it starts up in the brachial region and then goes over the radial bone. So the brachial region, for those of you who don't remember your body regions, is brachii meaning upper arm. So we have the biceps brachii, the triceps brachii, and the brachialis. These are the 3 primary muscles of the brachial region. The brachioradialis has an origin in the brachial region up at the humerus, and then it's going to extend down over, let me highlight that muscle again, down over the radius. So I want to highlight here, we have the thumb at the tip of my pointer. The radius is on the thumb side in anatomical position. So the brachioradialis goes from the brachial region over the radius bone. And that's the muscles of the shoulder and arm. Next we have the forearm and hand. So as we're looking at the muscles of the forearm and hand, this is where we really need to pay attention to the names. So the Pronator Teres pronates. The flexor carpi radialis flexes the carpal bones and is on the radius side. And this one flexes the carpal bones and is on the ulna side. So the names really tell you what to look for. Remember the pronation movement as we rotate the wrist and hand. So as we're looking for our Pronator Teres, the Pronator Teres is going to crisscross. It's going to go diagonally across the forearm. So I'll hide the Brachioradialis and get rid of some of this other connective tissue. So we can see how the Pronator Teres goes from the medial margin. Oops, what button did I press right there? There we go. So it goes from the medial margin of the elbow to the lateral, or the medial margin up here, attaching to the medial margin of the humerus, really the medial epicondyle of the humerus, down here to the radius. So since it goes diagonally across the forearm, it causes a twisting motion or pronation of the wrist and hand when it's contracted. Next we have the Palmaris Longus. This is a, long muscle that is going to connect to the palm. So we're looking for that Palmaris Longus. I want to highlight that it is on the medial side of the forearm. It's a long, skinny muscle, and I want to emphasize this connective tissue ligament, or this tendon right here for the Palmaris Longus. It goes to the palm. So let me get rid of our reticulum so we can see that Palmaris Longus better. There is the, Palmaris Longus. We also have the Flexor Carpi Radialis, the Flexor Carpi Ulnaris. Those names are pretty intuitive for most individuals. They cause flexion of the carpals, or flexion of the wrist and hand. One is on the radius side. I need to add a little muscles back. There we go. And I'll rehide that aponeurosis. So as we're looking at the Flexor Carpi Radialis, excuse me, not the Extensor. So we're looking for that muscle. The Flexor Carpi Radialis will be on the radial side. One is on the ulna side. To review, as we look at the radial side right here, we have our Flexor Carpi Radialis. And on our ulna side, or towards the pinky side, here we have the Flexor Carpi Ulnaris. Then we have the thenar, sometimes referred to as the thenar eminence. I want you to use this term, just the thenar. In visible body, it's a group. It's separated out as a group of smaller muscles. So as we're looking at our thenar, it's the bulge of your thumb. So we have 1, 2, 3 muscles of the thenar. I'll go ahead and do a multi-select so you can see what they all look like when they're grouped together. So this is our thenar eminence right here. The large meaty portion, I should say the proximal meaty portion of the anterior of your thumb. Then we have the extensors. We have the Extensor Carpi Radialis and Extensor Carpi Ulnaris. So within visible body, let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit here. Remember, the thumb was on the radius side, or recall the thumb was on the radius side. So our Extensor Carpi Radialis, right here, is broken up into 2 smaller groups. In visible body, they have a longus and a brevis. I'm going to go ahead and do a multi-select for you. There we go. So now you can see both of those muscles combined. That's our Extensor Carpi Radialis with the multi-select, both of the smaller subgroups highlighted. And I want to emphasize, because it's an extensor, it extends the wrist and hand. Look at the termination point. Oops, right down here. The termination point is on the posterior of the wrist and hand, causing the extension when those muscles are flexed. So their insertion is over here. And then we have the Extensor Carpi Ulnaris. The ulna is going to be on the pinky side. Here's one of the bones of the pinky. So as we're looking at the Extensor Carpi Ulnaris, it's going to be right here. Excuse me. right here. So it's going to be on the posterior of the forearm, and it has an insertion point that's on the posterior of the wrist and hand, and it goes over the ulna. And that's all we have for muscles of the upper appendage. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, class, happy studies.